Hello, my fellow kin. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another detachment deep dive video. On today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the long awaited, the long requested, and the recently reformed HEARTHBAND. Everybody's favorite detachment and one that I put off long enough. So with that said, let's jump on in and see what this detachment is all about. But of course, a massive, massive thank you to all of our amazing channel members whose ongoing support help make these videos possible. Thank you guys so much. It really does mean a lot. So HEARTHBAND has a very interesting, I think, development history rules-wise in terms of competitive 40K. So it's been almost a year since HEARTHBAND was first released as a Grotmus detachment in December of 2024 last year. And at the time of it being released, unfortunately, it was basically universally accepted that this was one of the worst detachments that was made for Grotmus. It unfortunately just did not support what Index Votann had to do. It did not even come close to comparing in terms of output and toolkit that was available with the Index book. And people were, again, at the time coping and saying that this was built with the new codex in mind. That apparently turned out to be false as well, because while at the time of the codex coming out very recently for the Leagues of Votann, this detachment remained unchanged and stayed in kind of this limbo state where people were a little bit unsure in terms of what would happen to HEARTHBAND. Would it get an update? When would it get an update? Would anything change? I'm happy to say that it did receive some changes very recently after the codex was released. And on top of that, I'm thrilled to say that, honestly, this detachment is very, very good. So what did they actually change here? Now, HEARTHBAND's detachment ability, Methodical Annihilation, has now switched to affect wound rolls of 1 instead of hit rolls of 1. This was a very welcomed change because with the codex coming out, a lot of the data sheets were fundamentally reworked, namely among them being the Hearthguard unit themselves. And this attachment, of course, as the name would imply, is Hearthguard focused. So with Hearthguard getting natively rerolling ones to hit, it was redundant, of course, to take them in a detachment that provided that very same benefit. So on a model per model basis, if you target the closest eligible unit, shooting or melee, rerolling wound rolls of 1. If you're in melee, it's any unit that's in engagement range with you, which is really nice. Now, on top of that, if you're a Call, Hearthguard, Uthar unit specifically, you also get an extra point of AP that applies to your melee and shooting, which again, very, very nice. Now, it's also worth mentioning one of the weirdest restrictions that the initial rendition of this detachment had, which was to exclude blast weapons, has now been removed. So your Hearthguard do get the benefit of rerolling wound rolls of 1 and the benefit of the extra AP for their blast weapons as well, which is great. The whole unit, the whole point you're taking HEARTHBAND to run Hearthguard, they get to have the full extent of the benefits. It's fantastic. So what kind of play style does this detachment support? It has very high output, as we'll see in just a moment looking through the Stratagem suite, as you have significant improvements to your consistency and damage output across the board. It also supports a rapid ingress pressure type of list because you're going to be taking Hearthguard, and Hearthguard have to go in Deep Strike. They're too slow to start on the table. So you're going to be taking these units. You're going to take 3 units of them of varying sizes. They're going to be in Deep Strike, and you're going to be threatening your ability to come down rapid ingress, to protect objectives, to threaten your opponents, to reinforce a flank, or as we'll see in just a moment through the Stratagems, have a 6-inch Deep Strike and just completely disrupt your opponent's side of the board. So Hearthguard out of focus, rapid ingress is a really big key part of this detachment and making it work. And I also think that this detachment, after playing it, felt really well-rounded. It felt fluid to play, which is something that I found lacked when I was testing out some of the other detachments, specifically Persecution Prospect. I found that that detachment had some good rules, but overall was very clunky in terms of sequence of play and flow and access to stratagems. Whereas in this detachment, despite thinking that there are limitations because, oh, you got to be the closest eligible, and oh, this only affects Hearthguard, I actually really thought that it played very fluid and smoothly, and never did I ever encounter a situation where I felt I was restricted by not being able to do something. You have all the tools to play the game and play it very well, which I think makes this a contender for one of our best detachments. If you're looking to see this detachment in action, I actually will have a tactical report using Hearthband coming out of Thursday this week. So be sure to check that out if you want to see one of the lists I'll talk about at the end of the video today in action against the brand new White Scars in a competitive setting. Moving on to the enhancements. First up, we have Bastion Shield. Bastion Shield, 25 points here. It essentially gives you Armor of Contempt for your unit that this enhancement is on in the shooting phase only. So it doesn't work in melee, unfortunately, but it does apply to the shooting phase. Now, there is a restriction. The units need to be within 12 inches of you shooting to have the negative effect of Armor of Contempt apply to them, where you reduce that AP count. However, there is a way for you to bump it up to 18 if you spend a yield point. So if you spend a yield point, anything within 18 inches that targets you is going to suffer from you having Armor of Contempt for that whole phase, which is really, really good. Instead of having it just apply for one activation, like many other instances of Armor of Contempt work, all instances of Armor of Contempt work for stratagem purposes, this enhancement kind of bypasses that at the limitation of having a specific range. So it's really solid, as you can imagine, on maps that have really tight firing lanes. And I think there are a lot of good use cases for this. You may not always see it, and I think it's going to be dependent on which maps you're playing on, which terrain format you're using. For instance, I think it's significantly better on WTC, and I do think on some GW maps it has a lot of play. I took this on table 6 to test it out because there is a spot where your natural expansion requires your opponent to get within 18 inches to shoot you on most unit sizes. So there are some good use cases for this, as I alluded to here. You could take this on basically any character. There's no restriction. I think the best argument here is to run this on either a Memnir, who's going to be with a 6-man Steeljack unit. What this gets you is 6 bodies at toughness 6, potentially -1 to wound if you're in your right doctrine. They have a 2-up save, 3 wounds each, access to cover, access to Armor Contempt if you position them correctly. And that just is a lot for your opponent to chew through. It's really difficult. So you have this big durable brick. And of course, the other alternative is you take this on a big unit of Hearthguard. They land somewhere, they're in the thick of the fight, somewhere in the middle of the table. And if things are approaching them to shoot and get on the objective, then you're going to get access to the buff as well for Armor Contempt. Next up, we have Quake Multi-Generators. So Quake Multi-Generators for call models only. What this does is if in the shooting phase you hit something, the unit becomes suppressed. You have to hit it with the call specifically, who has 3 shots on his gun. I think personally this is a redundant stratagem, a redundant enhancement to take, I should say, because historically before we had this new wave and this new codex, I did see a use case for Quake Multi-Generator. I had some points left over when I tried it out for the first time, this detachment, back in Index days, and I took Quake Multi-Generator. It was the most appealing one to me because it felt like it gave me some amount of agency over what I shot, and then on my next opponent's turn, they come attack me and they have a -1 to hit penalty. Now I think it becomes a little too redundant because everybody's running Capri Carriers, and if you aren't running Capri Carriers, go buy a Capri Carrier. Everybody takes at least 1, many people take 2, and the Capri Carrier has a built-in ability to suppress. The Carrier also already plays mid-board. It deploys quite aggressively. It's going to play the center of the table. It's going to be out in the open. It's going to be doing a move block for you. It's cheap enough, and it's going to obviously apply this debuff to something that is trying to just on top of what it already does, right? Like you have access to a suppression built into this unit that's already going to be playing center field. So you don't need to take this or build it into your list, I think personally, on a Hearthguard unit. Just doesn't really seem that valuable and a little bit of a waste of points. Next up, we have Iron Skin, and I actually think this is a pretty cute enhancement. So what it does, very simply, 10 points, gives you +2 wounds to a model. And again, there's no restriction here on which model it goes on. I think there are a couple good contenders here. So the first one I would elect to put this on is an E-Champ on a 5-man unit of Hearthguard. The reason being is that the 5-man unit of Hearthguard is a really nice little bodyguard unit, of course. The E-Champ packs a lot of punch and melee with his Mass Hammer. But what happens is, what I found anyway, once they get through the Hearthguard, the E-Champ dies pretty fast. Having 2 extra wounds on him, it's a little buffer, it just helps. It's relevant. You'd be surprised at how often it comes up. The 5-wound guy goes up to 7 and he survives on 1. Suddenly, hey, that's great. He's still in the game. He gets to have an extra activation. You'll see that again if you watch the tactical report coming out next week when I play Hearthguard. The next target I think is interesting for this is the Mad Scientist, because the Mad Scientist has a lot of self-inflicted damage. So if you could increase his wound count, it just gives him a little bit more staying power, and I think it could be a little bit more annoying for your opponent to deal with. Maybe, you fail one of your shocks, one of your overcharges, your opponent gets a shot into him, he lives with a wound or two. Again, I wouldn't build this into my list intentionally, deliberately. I wouldn't save 10 points, but you'd be, again, I'm sure as all of you know, it's very frequent that your lists end up somewhere around 1990, 1985, and this is, to me, more valuable than taking something like Quake Generator. The last enhancement we have here is High Cal. I really want to like this one. I think there was some potential here to make it better, but presently as it stands, it's 30 points, which is ridiculously expensive for an enhancement that doesn't do that much, and it gives you a 4-up fight on death for the Hearthguard unit, for the unit that the call is leading, which you'll put on the Hearthguard. Now the problem with this enhancement, besides it being 30 points, is that it's just way too inconsistent for the cost, right? If you're paying 30 points on an enhancement, you want it to guarantee do the thing you're trying to get it to do. And here there's a 50% chance that your unit fights on death. The other issue is that Hearthguard specifically in melee, they're just too inconsistent. They're very swingy. They only have 2 attacks each, it's low volume, and it's only damage 2. So on top of having a 50% chance to fight on death, only 5 guys will get to fight, assuming your opponent charged in and killed you to begin with instead of just shooting you. It doesn't feel like you'll get your points back on this very often. So personally for me, this is a hard pass. I don't think you run High Call. I just don't really see a use case for taking this and building 30 points into your list to account for it. Moving along to the stratagems, the first one we're looking at today is Breckenknots. Breckenknots is 1 CP, affects Hearthguard, Cal, or Uthar units. So if you have Cal or Uthar leading warriors, they become eligible as well. And it gives you a 4-up invulnerable save for the phase. Now, I know for many of you, and myself included at the start, I was like, oh my god, this looks great. You put this on Hearthguard, they're going to be unkillable. The problem is that in practice, what you actually see is that your Hearthguard are at this weird point of the 2-up save and access to cover and theoretically armor contempt if you have the enhancement on them, where it takes a lot to actually push you beyond the 4-up save anyway. Like, if you have cover on a 2-up save, you need something to be AP 3 to take you to a 4, right? And then if you have armor contempt, it's got to be AP 4. So there just aren't that many high AP shots that are going to go into this that I think it's something you'll be using on demand or as often as you may think you will. Now that said, it could come up in melee. I think this is something that's relevant. There's a lot of melee weapons that exceed AP 3 or are AP 3 and you don't have access to cover, for example, because it's melee. So I definitely see a use case for it. I just think it's going to be a little bit more situational depending on when you want to use this. It's not something you're going to be spending CP on as often as you may think. And there are ways, of course, to circumvent needing to use this by careful positioning to have access to cover, for example. Next up, we have Sure of Purpose. Sure of Purpose, so in the fight phase, a unit that has not yet been selected to fight does a 6-inch pile-in and consolidate. And this is really the first one of the strats we see that lends support to what I said about this detachment being very flexible and being a very strong toolkit to bring to the table. Why is that? Now, the timing on this is very good and important. You get to know the information beforehand after you make your charge and then decide if you want to use this strat or not, which again is massive. Why is that? Here's a couple use case examples, right? The most basic level. Let's say you charge something that's behind a wall and not everybody could get into engagement range to hit it. You pop Sure of Purpose, 6-inch pile in, everybody moves around the wall and gets to fight. Easy, simple. Another case for this, let's say you're trying to hit a unit. That's your primary goal. If you could hit this unit, that'd be great. You roll a massive charge, and now suddenly you could stretch out your unit of Hearthguard or Berserks in such a way that everybody's basing and there's a nice little line sticking out somewhere else. Hey, if I pile in 6 inches, I could actually reach another unit that was outside of the 3-inch distance or the 4-inch distance of my original pile-in. So now you could suddenly tag something else and tie it up or do damage to it. So again, very flexible. And that's just offensively. Defensively, proactively, you could use this to score primary as well, because now you hit something and you get to do a 6-inch consolidate afterwards, which again could let you tie something up, tag things, or reach an objective marker that was originally out of reach. So a very versatile strat. What I have found and what I expect to keep seeing is it's almost always going to come up at least one time per game. So keep a CP in mind for this and look for opportunities where your melee hitting units could benefit from this. Something else, I think a couple key units, of course, being Hearthguard, Berserk Squads, and even the 6-man melee Steeljacks, because they have a built-in ability that forces desperate escape tests at a penalty for things that fall back out of combat with you. So if you could get extra reach with a 6-inch pile and consolidate and touch a bunch of different things, your opponent's going to have to move some of them back to fall back and shoot, or just to move around the table, and they risk losing more models that way as well. Next up, we have Superior Craftsmanship for 2 CP. This is the most expensive strat and the only one of 2 CP in this detachment. And what it does is, in the fight phase, your melee attacks versus monsters or vehicles increases the damage characteristic by 1. So this is quite significant. Again, we're seeing an opportunity here to increase the consistency and the reliability and output of our activation into whatever it's going into, of course, being monsters or vehicles. Why is this relevant? Because it affects the math. It skews the math in your favor, and it means that you have fewer attacks that need to go through to reliably guarantee that you eliminate your target as much as possible. Or on top of that, it lets you punch up. That's another very easy one, right? Suddenly you do the math, something that would take a target down 80%, you now get to bring it up 100%, right? On paper. You get to increase your reliability in melee combat, which is always good. It's quite expensive, might not always come up because, again, you might not have to kill a monster or vehicle, but if it does, it's relevant, and it's something that will be matchup specific. It's just another tool to have in the toolbox that increases your, for example, Berserks. Their damage goes from damage 3 to damage 4 on something that's anti-vehicle, anti-monster. Extremely relevant. There's a situation that you'll see in my game, my tactical report coming out on Thursday, where I wish that I had considered keeping a CP for this, just to get that extra reliability. Something like Hearthguard go from damage 2 to damage 3, they suddenly become significantly more terrifying in melee combat against monsters and vehicles if they have access to something like lethal hits, for example. And then last but not least, of course, your 6-man Steeljack unit, who are damage 1, massive number of attacks, really decent AP. If you pop this strat on them, suddenly vehicles are going to be a little bit more afraid. They're going to respect them a little bit more because suddenly you double the damage of their attacks, which is pretty crazy to think about. Our 4th stratagem that we have available to us in this detachment is Unyielding Aggression. And this is just a very simple and sweet one. In your movement phase, an infantry unit gets to fall back, shoot, and charge. It's key, it's essential, it's a 10 out of 10 stratagem. The only way it would be better is if it affected vehicles as well, but in this detachment specifically, the focus, the scope is on your melee units, or units that could get into melee combat. Why is this really good specifically for Hearthband? The reason is because, in my opinion, it's a detachment, like we identified, that relies a lot on rapid ingress threats. Why do you rapid ingress Hearthguard? To protect or to hold your expansion or your opponents. You do this because you threaten heroics. That's the primary reason. And if you heroically intervene to something, right, what this allows you to do is, even if you don't kill your target, on your turn, that when you go next, because you heroic on your opponent's turn, you get the first activation on that next turn. So next turn you get to fall back, shoot, and charge again. Whereas if you just charged in and you don't have access to this, you're kind of stuck in melee combat, and on your turn, your opponent's going to get to activate into you first because it's ongoing combat. This is something I recognized when I was playing with Persecution Prospect. It was a big problem I was having, was that I was threatening heroics with my Hearthguard unit, and my opponent just wouldn't really care, because if I charged and I don't kill the target, I'm stuck there. I lose an activation my next turn. So this is actually a very powerful tool to have in more ways than you can imagine, because outside of just doing like, oh, well, I could fall back, shoot, and charge, get more movement and things like that, it supports your rapid ingress plays, which I think is very key. Our 5th stratagem here, Materialization Matrices. This is where things get a little bit more fun. This is units with a deep strike ability, so it's going to be your Hearthguard units, got a 6-inch deep strike. They cannot charge the turn that they deep strike at 6 inches. It's unfortunate. It's not like Death Shroud Terminators. However, it's still extremely powerful, as you can imagine, because, primarily it forces your opponent to have to think twice about how they screen. It's significantly harder to screen 6 inches over the course of the game. So having the threat of a 6-inch deep strike always makes your opponent think a little bit more. Now, I think specifically for Hearthband, why this is interesting is if we consider list design. I think this stratagem opens up a different avenue for list building versus other detachments that maybe utilize 6-inch deep strikes as well. And the use case that I'm thinking of here is a combination between having a 5-man Hearthguard unit and a 3-man bike squad. This to me just feels like the natural step of building this combo into your list for a very low points cost that actually has very powerful consequences over the course of the game that can work outside of this combination as well. So there's no downside to taking it. And essentially what you would do is you have your 5-man Hearthguard unit be as small as possible, so no character attached. And this unit is here deliberately to threaten the 6-inch deep strike in the smallest amount of space as possible. If it does get it to go off, you just blow up the part of the board that's screening, because screens are usually pretty cheap. And then the next turn you could rapid ingress your bike squad that was uppy downy and fill that gap. So I think it's really significant in terms of stealing your opponent's home objective. I think it's very powerful in terms of just having threats the whole game that your opponent has to be worried about, because yes, you have to come down with your Hearthguard before the end of round 3, but your bikes could stay there all game. So once these guys get to hit, you've made a hole and your opponent has to consider that for the rest of the game. So I think it has a powerful impact on how you design your list as well, outside of just having general usefulness. The last strat we have is Fury of the Hearth. I love Fury of the Hearth. Oh my god, it's so good. This is like a drug, I'm telling you. Oh my god. The first time you're going to get to play with this strat, I think it just sells the whole detachment, to be honest. You're going to see it inside of my game coming out on Thursday. Very relevant. Simply put, in your shooting phase, a Hearthguard unit gets +1 strength. You could spend a yield point, and they get sustained hits 1. This is incredible. Why? Because your plasma goes from strength 7 to strength 8, which is an incredible breakpoint. You have a unit now that usually will hit on 3s, because you'll be in Fortify when they come down. You reroll hit rolls of 1. You have sustained hits 1. On your 2-shot plasma guns, because you're in rapid fire range. You go to wound. You wound on 2s, you reroll 1s because of your detachment, your AP 4. Anything that goes through that's a hit is basically going to translate to a wound, which basically automatically kills a Marine target. It's just so good. It's so efficient in terms of its output. It's so consistent. You have sustained 1, you could spike, you could combo this with something like lethal hits through a call, and just get so much volume. And again, critically, it affects your blast weapons as well. So your strength 3 grenade launchers go to strength 4, and they have sustained 1, which is just so much volume. It took me like 2 minutes to resolve a 10-man unit's activation of shooting. It's just insane. It's very powerful. Again, instead of wounding Marines on 5s, you wound them on 4s now with your blast gun, and they have the extra point of AP. So suddenly, they're actually kind of terrifying. You could pick up full 10-man squads with ease. It's not even a problem. So what are my key takeaways on this detachment after looking through and actually testing it out on the table? I think there's a very strong emphasis on reserves and rapid ingress in this detachment, alongside heroic interventions, of course. The focus here is really specialized on a few select units, being Hearthguard, so you're going to want to have probably 3 units of Hearthguard of varying sizes. You're going to include some characters here that benefit from the keywords when they're attached to them or providing it to other units. I think it's extremely well-rounded, as we mentioned. There's powerful strat support that just opens this whole toolbox of really just good output consistency and mission play. And there are strong breakpoints like we just discussed. Your output is there. Your consistency is through the roof with rerolling 1s to wound and sustained hits. And on top of that, honestly, genuinely, it's ridiculously fun to play. It's one of the funnest attachments I got to field for Votann, hands down, hands down. It's going to be the focus for myself for the foreseeable future. It's just extremely, extremely fluid to play, which I think is a big thing that is important to me. Is there are no barriers. I know it feels like there might be because you have these limitations and these restrictions around like which units get benefits and being the closest to legible. I did not feel limited at all when I played. I swear to you, it felt extremely fluid and smooth to get on the table compared to something like Persecution Prospect, which actually was extremely restrictive and clunky in its execution, unfortunately, in my opinion. So I would definitely recommend trying this attachment. I think it's extremely competitively viable. It's very fun and it's very strong. So with that said, I'm going to show you guys not one, not two, not even three, but 4 competitive lists that I think are going to be a really good example and expression of what this detachment can do. And 2 of them are going to be from actual tournaments that were played that had really good rankings as well. So we'll take a look at all of those in just a moment. All right, so for the first list, this is the list that was my first kind of attempt or draft at a Hearthband list. I wanted to include all the pieces that I felt like testing just to get a feel for them and understand how the flow of the detachment is, like how tempo feels and how to just play it out. So this was the first list I played. The video is going to be coming out Thursday where you get to see this list in action again versus the brand new White Scars in a competitive setting. So we have an Iron champion kicking things off with a Mass Hammer. He's running the Iron Skin Enhancement for 2 extra wounds. He's going to be leading a 5-man unit of Hearthguard. All my Hearthguard in this list have the same loadout of the Plasma Guns, the Gauntlets, and the Hesir Hammer on the Hesir, of course. I then have a Call who's going to be attached to a 10-man Hearthguard unit. He's running the Mass Gauntlet, so you could really bump up his damage and melee with the Strat support, and he has a Vulcanite Disintegrator. I then have the Memnir Strategist who's running Bastion Shield. This was an interesting choice. I wanted to test this out specifically on a 6-man unit of Jax. The reason being is that at my store, a lot of the tournaments are being played on GW Layout 6, and the firing lane to reach your expansion there on many of the missions is quite narrow. You have to usually be within 18 inches to reach most units, depending on positioning. So my logic here was take this on a 6-man Jack unit, hold your natural with it, your opponent just can't kill you off of it. They have to go within 18 to shoot. You're going to save on 2s, armor contempt, access to cover, and just be ridiculously annoying to shift. I then have a 10-man unit of Hearthkin Warriors with all the good stuff on them, and these guys are going to be split by a Sagittar into 2 sets of 5. I then ran with 3 sets of 3 Grav Thunderkin. The Grav Thunderkin are quite good on paper in this detachment because they essentially provide you with reliable, in quotations, anti-tank coming in from reserves, and they get to have reroll wound rolls of 1. So you're rerolling wound rolls of 1 on the closest eligible target, which is what you're shooting at 24 inches, and it's going to be a vehicle or monster, presumably, which means you get to have a higher chance of hitting your anti-monster or vehicle 3-up if you wound. So you get to reroll wound rolls of 1, you're just looking for 3s, they're consistent, which is what we're looking for here. I then have 2 sets of 5 Chthonian Berserks running the Mauls. I'm not running any land fortresses in this list, and because of that, I wanted to have some built-in anti-tank and anti-monster with access to, again, the Gravs, and in this case, also the Berserks. They're strength 5 still, so they could double as like an anti-elite or anti-infantry killing piece as well, being damage 3 and just 15 attacks. But largely they're here as just some extra insurance against dreadnoughts or vehicles or monsters, things that are pushing up midboard. I could stage them with a Sagittar, I could spit them out, hide them behind a wall, and get them ready to fight. I then have, for the meat of the list, 3 sets of Hearthguard. Like I said, same loadout on everybody here. I got 2 sets of 5. One is with the E-Champ, and one is going to be alone. This is what I was saying about threatening that 6-inch Deep Strike bubble. And then the other one here is with that E-Chant to pack a little bit more of a punch on a rapid ingress heroic threat, which happens in the game and was extremely relevant. I then have the 10-man brick of Hearthguard that are attached with the Call. The Call is providing me lethal hits here, which is my logic for just having like an Overwatch threat, having a unit that just dishes out a significant amount of damage to basically neutralize any target on the table across any objective marker. It's my delete button. You need a delete button, this is it for me. I then have a 10-man Jaeger squad that's split into a Capri Carrier, and then a 6-man Steeljack unit with the heavy Vulcanite Disintegrators, because I felt like I was a little bit low on like chaff clearing stuff. If somebody just put a lot of things in the middle of the table, I wanted to be able to just walk out and shoot it, or if somebody tried to threaten my natural expansion with cheap OC, I could just Overwatch and probably kill it, because the Memnir's attached, I Overwatch for free, and I'm not running Uthar, as you could obviously see here, which means I'm tight on CP, so I wanted to have some of that CP generation, or management rather, I should say, built into the list. I then have 3 sets of 3 bikes. They have your standard loadout of the Hylas and all the add-ons for their war gear options. They're such a great piece to have in this detachment. They ignore mods, they're fast, they go uppy downy, they combo extremely well with the 6-inch Deep Strike Hearthguard. They're, again, just like this very aggressive early game unit. You could use one to screen, you could sack the other two to try to pick up cheap scoring pieces that your opponent might have. You reroll wound rolls of 1, you reroll hit rolls of 1. They're just very consistent. They're damage 2, a lot of volume. It's a great unit. It's absolutely a great unit, amazing mission play. And they just hide in reserves and scare your opponent the whole game. And then, of course, like we mentioned, we have our 2 dedicated transports, being a Capri Carrier and a Sagittar, who's taking the Hylas gun, because, again, I don't have any land forts here with good anti-tanks, so I have instead some redundancies built in with the Gravs, the Hammers, and, of course, the Sagittar now, who also has an anti-tank gun as well. So, again, this video here, for this list, you'll be able to watch that in the tactical report coming out later this week. The second list I have for you here is very similar to the first design I took, but instead I swapped things around to bring in 2 land fortresses if you wanted to run those instead and get a little bit more anti-tank on the table and just have like this beefier unit that could kind of drive up and sit on objectives for you, give you OC, be durable, bait things out so you could then rapid ingress or deep strike your Hearthguard to deal with whatever comes out to kill your land fortress. So in this case, we just have a call, and he has the Bastion Shield enhancement. I then have a set of 10 Hearthkin Warriors. I then have 2x3 Thunderkin. I'm a little bit lower on the Thunderkin here because I do have, of course, the land fortresses. I then also have 2x5 Berserks, and I have the intent here is to put basically the Thunderkin and the Berserks inside of both land fortresses. So you have 2 forts here, as we'll see in a bit. Each one has a package of Thunderkin and Berserks, and this is just like a really nice self-sufficient package to have. It's fast because of the land fortress. You get extra movement, so you could stage and then come out and charge. You have anti-tank guns built into the platform. You have anti-infantry guns built into the platform. You have your Gravs that strip cover and provide some anti-tank damage. And then you have your Berserks who could just run out and basically clean up whatever the other 2 units fail to kill, or act as like a heroic intervention threat and then fight on death to try to nuke something. So I think it's a very actually interesting combination. I'm excited to test this one out. And then moving along, we have, of course, our 3 sets of Hearthguards. So I have a 5, and then a 10. The 10 is going to be accompanied by the Call, again, for the lethal hits and the Bastion Shield. I then have a set of Jaegers. I have 2x3 Pioneers, the double land forts with the Magna Rails, and then I have a Capri Carrier to split the Jaegers and a Sagittar to split the Warriors, so you have more mission play pieces and something to hold your home, because again, you only have 2 sets of 3 bikes. You'll sack one earlier in the game, and then the other one is going to screen for you. The third list I have for you today is one that was actually played at an event and performed extremely well, and this one is brought to us by our friend of the channel, Greg Chamberlain, who took it to the London Grand Tournament this year. So his list is called I Couldn't Fit 5 More Hearthguard. Unfortunate. And he is running a Call, a Memnir, and Uthar. So no enhancements here, just a nice suite of characters that are providing keywords and buffs to his units, like the lethal hit specifically on the Hearthguard bricks. We then have a set of 10 Hearthkin Warriors. We have a Capri Carrier to split Jaegers, a Sagittar to split the Warriors. We have 3x3 of these Grav Thunderkin. We have 2x5 of the Chthonian Berserks with Mauls. And then we have 10, 20, 25 Hearthguard. So we have 2 10-man Hearthguards that have calls attached to them, and then a little 5-man that's unaccompanied, again to threaten probably the 6-inch Deep Strike. And then we have 3 sets of 3 Pioneers and the 1 set of 10 Jaegers that are going to be split up by the Carrier. So you can see here there's kind of a recurring theme with these lists. It's really leaning heavily into the Hearthguard output and damage as kind of the backbone of the list. And then you have all these incredibly light mission play pieces that interact very well with the rest of your hard-hitting units to kind of just ensure that you're very well balanced and you're kind of like a take-all-comers list for Leagues of Votann here, which competes honestly with even Needguard, I would say, in terms of viability. The last list we have here is one that caught my eye early on and I was a big fan of. This one's run by Mathieu Clerc, who brought it to the Munsterland Major of 73 players this year. So he was taking a Memnir Strategist with Bastion Shield, 2 Capri Carriers, Brokir Thunderkins, so 3 of them with the Gravs. He was taking a single Chthonian Earthshaker unit to screen the backfield and help deal with screens. He had 3 sets of 5 Hearthguard that are all unaccompanied. So these are basically just like these self-sufficient packages that come down. They benefit from the enhancement for the stratagem of +1 strength, sustained hits. On average, they pick up whatever little Marine squad they're trying to brawl with. So they're very efficient at stealing primary by killing whatever's on it. And they're also quite powerful for threatening that 6-inch deep strike as well when you need it. He then has 2 land fortresses with the heavy Magna Rail cannons, and then 2 sets of 10 Jaegers that are both split inside of each respective Capri carrier. So a lot of good mission play, and if you don't know this, this is going to be obviously on WTC terrain, where I think you actually do get a little bit more value out of the double Jaeger, double carrier piece than a good chunk of the GW maps. We then have, rounding out the list here, a 3-man unit of Gunjacks. We have a 3-man unit of Melee Jacks, and then a 6-man unit of Melee Jacks as well. So even here, where we're running something that doesn't have Berserks, for example, leans more heavily into the Steel Jacks, there's kind of always this over or underlying, I should say, theme or archetype that's being built, where you have a very well-rounded list that has good amounts of anti-tank shooting, anti-infantry, good mission play, hard-hitting pieces, and you have some kind of melee threat as well. So there you have it, the Hearthband Detachment Deep Dive video, and 4 competitively viable lists for GW and WTC terrain that you could try in your next game. If you're interested in seeing Hearthband on the table, I will have a tactical report coming out on Thursday where you could see one of my lists in action. Again, if you enjoyed this video, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you can, please leave me a like, subscribe, and leave a comment for me down below. Let me know what you think about these detachments. Let me know what you think about Hearthband specifically. Have you gotten it on the table yet? What are your thoughts? And with that, I'll catch you all next week when we do a deep dive on Need Guard next. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.